radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
Well. Good evening. Wrapping up the week. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Today is Thursday, May 2nd. And yes, that's right. It is my Friday. And I was getting a little worried. Our guest tonight, Dr. Robert Zubrin, and I've interviewed him many times over the years. Tonight we're going to be discussing living on Mars. And he just popped in, and now he's coming back. Hey, Robert, you can hear me. They can't see you yet. Tilt your camera down just a little bit so we can just have you ready to go. Yeah, there you go. A little more. So a couple of things while Robert is getting set up. We didn't do our normal sound check before the show, so we're just going to jump straight into it tonight, and we'll, just be professionals and get things done. I want to remind everybody about a couple of things that are happening immediately. In 10 days here in Los Angeles is the red carpet premiere of Billy Carson's new TV series, Aeronautics. And it's at the Regal Cinemas, downtown LA at LA Live. It's the largest theater in Los Angeles. This is an all-day event. Come and hang out with us. The tickets are below. This is May 12th. All right. And another announcement that I did earlier today. Of course, I've got Disclosure Fest Stairway to the Stars at Castaic Lake the weekend of June 10th through the 12th. And then right after that, the Conscious Awards in Miami, Florida, the 2024 Conscious Awards. And that's August 3rd through the 4th. That's also an all-weekend thing. Now, it was just announced today. I announced it earlier. The host for the event is Giorgio Tsoukalos. So come and hang out with all of us. We got Giorgio hosting. Of course, I'm kind of, I'm the voice of the awards. Yeah, so much fun. So much fun. So come and hang out with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, Giorgio, and everybody else at the Conscious Awards in Miami. Again, the links for everything are below. I do want to get straight to it. One last thing before I get to Robert. Earlier today, I escaped. I did 3 shows today. And before I got things started, I jumped on the bike and went out to Elizabeth Lake. And I post a lot of pictures of Elizabeth Lake. But today, when I got there, I was completely alone. There was nobody there. And it was surreal. It was just me and nature and ducks, and you can hear crickets, and it's just amazing. Anyway, I posted a video of that. You hear me talking about those kinds of escapades all the time. Go over to social media and check out the video. It's actually very, very cool. So tonight, Mars, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, is the subject of conversation everywhere all day long. It's press releases, it's comments, it's work that's being done, it's exploration and everything else, prepping for Mars. That's what the discussion is. And for me and for this community, it's all about Robert Zubrin when it comes to the subject. He has been shouting from the mountaintops for decades about this subject. He has been a consultant. The Planetary Society and everything that he has put together about all of this, and it's now happening. There's the best on the subject is Robert Zubrin, and he is with us tonight. And we are going to talk about not only his ideas, but the latest science and the research to get things started over on our nearest neighbor, which is Mars. He's a distinguished nuclear and aerospace engineer with over 4 decades of expertise, formerly a senior engineer at Lockheed Martin. I wonder if he was at Lockheed with me here in Palmdale. He now serves as president of Pioneer Astronautics, leading numerous successful projects for NASA, the military, and private clients. MarsSociety.org, why Mars. The links are below over on our website and throughout social media. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, the one and only, there he is, Robert Zubrin. Robert, good evening, young man.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me on your show again, Jimmy.
Yeah, it's really good to talk to you. And here's the thing, Robert, and you... I'm sure that you're used to this. Maybe you're not, but everybody today seems to be talking about it. You have been pushing for this, which seems like forever. Do you feel vindication that these moments seem to be unfolding? How do you feel about this?
Well, I do feel a sense of progress. I mean, things have moved forward. I would have wished they had moved forward a lot faster. They could have moved forward a lot faster. They should have moved forward a lot faster, but they have moved. We've had a whole bunch of robotic missions to Mars, and now human missions are on the horizon, especially with SpaceX developing its Starship, which will make possible not only human missions to Mars, but the settlement of Mars. And, you know, I have a new book out called The New World on Mars. And the subtitle is What Can We Create on the Red Planet? Whereas my first book about Mars was The Case for Mars. And it was really, how can we get humans to Mars? Let me show you how it could be done. Okay. And now the ball has moved to, we're going to Mars. So now the real question is, what will we create once we are there?
Now, this is going to be a great conversation tonight, and I can't wait to get into it. But let me actually start here. It does seem to be moving fast and quickly. It seems like, and it's just the nature of the world sometimes. Do you think this time around maybe we are getting too far ahead of our skis? You know, everybody's excited, but we're talking about in the next few years, which is like tomorrow in human time. Are we really ready for this?
Well, ready or not, here we come.
Right. Exactly.
And, now, let me qualify things a bit because Elon Musk sometimes makes projections for doing things sooner than they're really going to happen. He eventually does deliver an amazing amount, but sometimes he gets a little too optimistic. So I don't think we're landing on Mars in 2026 or anything like that. But I do think we will land by maybe 2032.
Really? And do you think it'll be Musk?
It could be. Well, let me put it to you this way: if it does happen in 2032, it'll either be Musk or the Chinese. Right. In terms of now, if Musk gets diverted because he gets too interested in Twitter or something and goes off in another direction, or if there's an accident in SpaceX that derails them, because you know this is a risky business, things can happen. There are other American companies that are prepared to pick up the flag and move forward, but they're behind him, 5 to 10 years behind him. So if SpaceX should fail for any reason, then we're not talking 2032, then we're talking the late 2030s. But if SpaceX stays on track, yes, 2032. And then there is the Chinese wild card. they are pushing very fast.
Yeah, they are. It's definitely a race there. They want to get to Mars, taking their time. But the other part, as far as Mars go, but their space program is on pitch, man. I mean, they're not playing around in any aspect of their space program, and they've got definitely their sights dead set on Mars. Have you talked to Musk?
Yes.
And what is his? Because this leads to my next question: is his vision a shared one with you?
I think it's about a 75% overlap. I mean, there are some differences. I think it's going to happen. I mean, we're both for human settlement to Mars. We both think that it's a doable thing. We both think that starting from their very first mission, you want to make maximum use of Martian resources. The Mars mission plan that I laid out in the case for Mars of making methane and oxygen rocket fuel on Mars is the basis of the SpaceX plan as well. And so forth. Now, some things. Okay, there's some technical differences. But if we want to look at big picture stuff, he's laid out a plan where when you're ready to go, he's going to send 1,000 ships to Mars, each with 100 people. So there's 100,000 people on Mars. And the next launch opportunity, they're going to send another 100,000 and another 100, like Normandy Beach. Boom. Okay. Now, I don't think that that's how it's going to happen. I don't think that it can happen that way. I think that it's going to be more like Plymouth Rock or Jamestown, where the first settlement is a very small number of people, but they established the first, well, in Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, there are farms. On Mars, there'll be greenhouses, but you start creating the capability to produce food and other useful materials on Mars and build housing. And then you can send somewhat more people, and then that accelerates the buildup, and then you send even more people, so it will grow organically. So I don't think that from the first human landing on Mars to the first city, you get 1 million people on Mars in a decade or two. It took, well, the Pilgrims landed in 1620. Jamestown was 1607. We had 2 million people in America in 1750. Probably 1 million maybe in 1720 or so. So it took a century to get to 1 million people. And obviously they weren't all in one place. At the time of the American Revolution, the biggest city was Philadelphia, was 50,000 people. New York was 25,000. Boston.
And that was an atmosphere that you could breathe. Right.
Yes, that
Yeah,
was.
right.
But here's the thing about that. Half the Pilgrims died in their first year here. It looks easy to live in Massachusetts now, okay? But when you were the first pioneers, this was an extremely dangerous environment. It was, for example, much colder than people were used to in England or Holland, where the Pilgrims came from. The same crops wouldn't grow. There were various diseases in the water and so forth. So forth. I mean, this was risky stuff. And I think that we will have a much lower casualty rate on Mars. We know much more about Mars than they knew about Massachusetts when they got there. So, it's relative to our technology and our knowledge, Mars is actually easier than Frontier, Massachusetts.
The other part, let's back up a little bit. And I have to ask why. Why go to Mars? And I'm asking you that. In my opinion, we've got to blow this popsicle stand eventually. Right. And Mars is right there. And we need to be looking at other planets outside of our solar system if humanity is to indeed survive. Okay, and I'm just talking about the stability of our sun, and that's my take on things. For you, when you hear that question, why go to Mars? What's the point? What's your answer?
It's a fundamental form of freedom. The ability to go to some place where the rules haven't been written yet and have a new start. And in other words, people say, okay, so that's great. What's the government going to be? What's your idea of this great new form of civilization? I say, well, I have some ideas, but that's not even the point. Okay, there's going to be lots of people with ideas, very different ideas, in fact, on what the ideal society should be. Okay, so I don't think there's going to be one giant Mars city. I think there'll be dozens of little Mars city-states started by different people with different ideas on what the ideal society should be. But they need to have a place where they can go, where they can give it a run. Now, a lot of them will be wrong and their colonies will fail. Okay, but the thing is, the ones that get it right, not only will they succeed, they will grow. The ones that get it right, that actually offer people a chance for a better way of life, will draw immigrants. Just like the United States, okay, the young United States, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but better than anything that had been before or elsewhere in the New World. Okay, at the time of the American Revolution, the Caribbean islands were producing more revenue than the 13 colonies. They had all these very lucrative sugar plantations for shipping stuff to England, molasses for rum and so forth. And but guess what? The free society that was created here, and especially in the northern half of the United States, the free half of the United States, as opposed to the South, that drew immigrants from Europe. It drew talent. It grew tremendously, and it became a continental nation committed to liberty. It became a tremendous engine for invention. The British invented the steam engine. We invented the steamboat, and we went on to telegraphs and electric light bulbs and centrally generated electrical power and recorded sound and motion pictures and airplanes. And wow, okay, and people came here because it was a chance for a better shot, and because it was a chance for a better shot, it unleashed talent in a way that had never been done in any society before. And that was good for all of humanity. For the past century and a half, America has been about 4% of the world's population. It's been responsible for 50% of the inventions. So we've been a tremendous benefactor, not just to the people who are able to benefit themselves by coming here, but to people all over the world. So you create new creative branches of human civilization on Mars. Who knows what they're going to invent? I mean, by definition, Mars colonies are going to be largely populated by technically skilled people in a frontier environment that's going to challenge them. It's going to challenge them to invent, and so they will. And those inventions that they make, whether it's in genetically modified foods, because they only have these little greenhouses to grow crops, and so they're going to need ultra productive crops. Okay, in much more efficient forms of nuclear energy, in fusion power, in artificial intelligence, so that give people tools so that anyone could do anything, because they're going to have a much smaller division of labor. That they're going to need to multiply the skills of people. So these sorts of inventions, which Mars is going to be pushed for to create, this will benefit all of humanity. And also, yes, just as the founders of the United States called their Constitution a noble experiment. That's what they called the Young United States, a noble experiment. Okay, it was an experiment. And the ideas that they had, 18th century liberalism, okay, human rights, democracy, okay, all this, freedom of religion, so forth, no blood nobility. These ideas were around. They didn't invent them, but you couldn't implement them in Europe. In Europe, the rules had already been made. This is how it is. Okay, so if you wanted to give these new ideas a run, you had to go to someplace new. And we did in America. And yes, it wasn't perfect, but it was better. And So millions of people voted with their feet to come here. And not only that, guess what? It has become the standard. And even countries today that aren't democracies pretend that they are in order to try to meet that standard. Okay. And so there you go. So this is how we progress. Humanity progresses to experiment. So we need a lab. We need a planet where the rules have been written yet, and where lots of people with lots of new ideas can go there and say, this is the kind of society that would really be good. And we'll see. And the ones that aren't, they'll just go away. They'll fail. But the ones that really get it right, they will draw immigrants from all over the world. They will create new societies, and they will create an example that will not only be followed on Mars and for planets further out, but back on Earth as well.
Let's talk about. There's a whole list of stuff. Oh, by the way, I'm sure you caught it. NASA's press release today about the 9 companies they have just signed on for proposals for different aspects of Mars and the Mars project. Everything from setting up communications and internet to robotics to imaging, transportation. All of this is now out there. It's a pretty lengthy list, and I reported on that earlier today. So let's get a few things out of the way, because it was interesting how NASA laid this out. One of the things, and it's kind of like the elephant in the room, there is some misunderstandings. So I'm going to ask you to clarify a couple of things. One, there are a couple of different camps out there. One that will say it's absolutely impossible for a human to live on Mars. It's radiation, it's temperatures, it's so violent, it's a dead planet, it's got a dead core. There's no way it can happen. Then you have the other camp that, no, man, Mars is, it's got blue skies and we can turn this around. It's not that bad. And if we're located in the right area on Mars, we can get through it, and it's going to be okay. So which side is right here, or is it somewhere down the middle?
It's about 3/4 of the way towards the optimistic side.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah. All right. It's not. No. Okay. People said everything was impossible until they invented it, right? I mean, flying was impossible. Okay. If men were meant to fly, they'd have wings. And it was impossible until the Wright brothers showed that it was possible. Okay. And, you could just go down the list, right? And even the expression shooting for the moon, right? Going to the moon was impossible. It was even a figure of speech. Well, there you go. But it's not trivial. It's not easy. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy. But look, all the elements needed to support life and technological civilization exist on Mars. It's all there. That's point one. Point two, while the temperatures are on the cold side, you can create habitats, you can heat them. I mean, really, our ancestors, humans are not really native to the Earth. We're native to Kenya, tropical Africa. That's why, we're tropical animals. We have these long, thin arms with no fur. Okay? So we invented clothes. Okay? And fire. Okay? And techniques that would allow us to find food even in the snow-covered landscape of Ice Age Europe. Okay? And Asia. And so,
we're not gonna do that on Mars.
Well, no, not exactly that, but fundamentally,
you know what I'm saying.
We became able to settle the Earth by inventing technology.
Right.
No one could survive a single winter night here in Colorado, where I live, without technology. Humans in the state of nature didn't have clothes.
Yep.
Okay, this is an invention, and the fire is an invention. Weapons that could kill large animals at a distance were an invention. And it's by inventing that we transformed ourselves from a local species to a global species. And it is by invention that we will transform ourselves from a global species into a multiplanetary species. Okay, so you need to develop the ways to produce food, not just on icy winter Europe, but on Mars, in greenhouses or in tunnels, or entirely synthetically using biochemical technology, or lots of other things you could do. I mean, heating a cold habitat, we know how to do that. I mean, that's not that hard. Producing food on Mars, that's harder, but in principle, we know how to do it. To energy, we don't need, Mars has no fossil fuels, but nuclear energy will work on Mars. And there are more advanced forms of nuclear energy. You know, the pressurized water reactors that are what over 90% of all nuclear reactors worldwide are today, because they're proven, and people said that's good enough. Well, they only get about 1% of the energy out of the uranium that is mined. Okay, you use a breeder reactor, you get 90%. Okay, and I think the Martians are going to want to do that because whether they're mining it on Mars or transporting it from Earth, they're going to want to be a lot more efficient. And deuterium. Do you know what? Deuterium is the heavy isotope of hydrogen, and it's 5 times as common on Mars as it is on Earth. And it's the fuel for fusion reactors. Now, we don't have fusion reactors on Earth. People are in no rush to get it. We got all these fossil fuels. What do we need fusion power for? Okay, well, the Martians aren't going to have fossil fuels. And they got all this deuterium. They're going to say, we're going to put this to work. And so they will be driven to develop fusion power. And that will create unlimited amounts of carbon-free, non-polluting power, which will obviously benefit the Earth tremendously. So you got all these people saying, oh, well, we got climate change. Why don't you think about that? This is how you're going to solve it. You're going to solve it by having people who invent the stuff that you need to solve it. And the people who invent it are going to be driven to do it because they need it now, not 200 years from now, because somebody's worried about the temperature going up 1 degree per century. They're going to say, because we need power. We need it now. Okay. And this is how you solve problems. You know, 100, well, not quite 100, 120 years ago, okay, horses was still how people got around and pulled carts and so forth. And the cities were filled with horse poop. And they're unsanitary and they stank and is a real problem. How did we solve that problem? We didn't solve that problem by making horses too expensive so people wouldn't use horses anymore because they couldn't afford it. We solved it by inventing something better, automobiles. Okay, which have some pollution, but less than 1% of what a horse does. And
yeah, it's probably true. I remember, especially the way that, and the follow-up conversations from A Case for Mars, the skeptics would always say, we can't, it's impossible to take all of this stuff to Mars. And that was an old school model of looking at things. You had always said, use the resources on Mars. Don't take everything there. Use what Mars has got. Right. And now, today, with the revelation and revolution of 3D printing and that technology, it was like you were prophetizing this idea, but it has certainly come full circle. But the 3D printer, as convenient as it is, still needs stuff to go into it to spit stuff out. Are those resources on Mars?
Yes, they are. So, I mean, for example, the reason why Mars is red is because it's covered with predominantly iron oxide, rust. So making iron and steel on Mars is straightforward. The planet is an iron mine. And so steel is something that can be 3D printed. It's one of the best things to 3D print with. Of course, Mars has also got hydrogen and water, carbon dioxide, which means you can make not only fuels but plastics, which is another thing you could 3D print. Okay, and there are fancier kinds of plastics than just polyethylene. Polyethylene is very useful. It's nice and cheap, and people make things out of it. But you could make plastics that are like ivory. Because, or even like wood, because all those things are just compounds of hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, and you got all that stuff on Mars. Make fabrics, okay? Make flannel shirts. Because you can make cotton. So all these things. I mean, look, there really is no such thing as a natural resource. There's only natural raw materials. And it is human technology that turns materials into resources. Okay? I mean, deuterium is not a resource now. It will be once we have fusion power. Uranium was not a resource until we invented nuclear power, practically within human memory. Oil wasn't really a resource until we invented oil drilling and refining and machines that would run on the product. And for that matter, land wasn't a resource until people invented farming. I mean, land had no value if you don't know how to farm. So people create resources. And here's an interesting fact for you. Take this thing called the Bronze Age, which lasted like 4,000 years, okay? 4,000 years, in which the primary metals were alloys of copper, okay? And these metals, including copper, tin, zinc, gold, silver, lead, these are all metals you can smelt at low temperatures. But guess what? Collectively, they are less than 100 parts per million in the Earth's crust. Iron is 50,000 parts per million in the Earth's crust, vastly more common than copper. But it takes a higher temperature kiln to extract the iron from iron ore than copper. So for 4,000 years, the metals people were using were copper and some additives, okay, which was like 500 times less common than iron. And all of a sudden, once people had kilns that could smelt iron, metals become 500 times more plentiful. So instead of just having metals that only the richest people, only the aristocrats could afford metal weapons and armor and so forth, or artwork made of bronze, okay, now it becomes something the common people can have access to cut down trees and iron tip plows, and yes, swords and spears as well. So the nature of society changes because the common people now have metal tools, and all sorts of land that previously couldn't be farmed because people didn't have iron tip plows. Now they did. So it's a vast expansion of human civilization occurs as a result of this one technological leap. Metals become hundreds of times more available. And then, okay, aluminum was unknown to science until 1820 and unknown to the consumer market until the 20th century. So just think about it. You go into any real antique store, there's nothing there made of aluminum. Nothing.
No, that's true. That's true. That is true. I'm just going to ask you a question for me really quick. And it's on everybody's mind, and I'm just going to say it out loud. It's weird how you hear about ice on Mars, but you don't hear about what kind of ice, number one. Number two, we haven't landed anything where the water is, if there is water ice on the surface of Mars, which I'm sure that there is, right?
No. In 2007, we landed a lander near the Martian North Pole, and it landed on ice.
It did? Okay. And what did they find?
Ice.
Water ice?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, since then, the orbiters have found glaciers on Mars, gigantic glaciers that go as far south as 38 degrees north, which is the latitude of San Francisco on Earth. Glaciers, just imagine glaciers as far south as San Francisco that are made of pure water ice, and they're just covered with a foot of dust. But we can see them now because we have radar that can see through the dust.
Yeah, I saw that press release, and when they, and especially the latest one where there more ice than all the oceans on Earth kind of comment, but under dirt. But we've now located it, and my question is this speculation? Or is this in the zone of this is fact and we don't have to worry about it because it is fact?
It's
is
fact.
there real?
There's
Okay.
glaciers on Mars, and in addition to glaciers, there's and these are glaciers of pure water ice, and they're not as big as all the oceans of Earth, but they're as big as the Great Lakes, which is big.
Yeah.
And the
I was exaggerating for effect, but you know how the press release was just like,
wow.
Yeah.
So, but it is wow. It no one's going to use up all the water if you got as much water as in the 5 Great Lakes. And and in addition to that, there is a lot of stuff, continent-sized regions, which you have soil, which is basically frozen mud. It's like 60% water content in the mud. So there's both pure water ice and there's frozen mud. There's a lot of water on Mars. And that's very different from the moon, where aside from a few permanently shadowed craters near the South Pole, in lunar soil is like, parts per million water. It's less water in lunar soil than there is in sidewalk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, next question, and I think it's an important one. There's radiation, and we have the issue with gravity, and temperature too as well, which apparently would be largely indoor living. Not a big deal. I stay indoors a lot, but the question is, what about the first generation of Martians that are born on Mars? Are they genetically going to be different just because of the gravity, the environment, and the things that they are exposed to? I'm saying Martians, it sounds strange, but that's effectively what we're talking about here. How will they differ or be affected and different from us?
Well, okay. So in the first place, they will diverge culturally. We'll get back to that. But you're talking about biological differences.
Yes.
Okay. Now that will take longer to take effect, but it will take effect. Now, initially, children of people from Earth born on Mars will be genetically the same as Earth people, because the fact that your environmental conditions don't change your genes. Okay.
Gravity's not a big deal?
No. You're not here. I'm saying genetically they'll be the same. Okay. Now, look, 2 identical twins are genetically identical, but if one works out every day and the other doesn't, they will have different levels of muscles. Okay.
But wouldn't you be taller, like first generation?
Well,
I would think.
What I'm saying.
I don't want to sound dumb.
Well, I believe that eventually, the people will become taller and thinner, more lightly built, because if you have a lower gravity environment, it will favor those traits. Okay. See, when any animal species moves to a new environment, which is different than the old environment, then certain traits that were less favorable in the old environment now all of a sudden are good. And so they'll be favored, and the animals will evolve in the direction of more of them having this trait, which previously was a disability, now is an ability. Okay. So yes, people who move to a lower gravity environment, it will favor builds that are taller and thinner. Uh, if we ever move to a planet which has stronger gravity than the Earth, then the short, strong build will be favored. But here's the thing: even before they are genetically different, uh, I think that people born on Mars will find Earth unpleasant. They'll say, "Why would anyone live here, where you can hardly jump 3 feet off the ground instead of 9, like everybody can do on Mars?" But I mean, in other words, the gravity will weigh on them. It will be uncomfortable. They won't be used to it. They won't want to come to Earth. Okay. The and also though, even they will develop ways of walking and running and doing things that exploit the lower gravity. So when Earthlings come to Mars, they'll look kind of awkward in how they shuffle around close to the ground instead of kind of skipping. The so I think well, the culture will also change a lot. Okay, but but in addition, even on individuals, the musculature will be altered somewhat because they're in a different environment, and certain muscles that are used a lot on Earth will be used less, and they'll diminish, and other muscles that we don't take much advantage of will get a lot more use, and they'll become stronger. It's just like I bet people like Polynesians who live on islands and do a lot of swimming, their musculature is different than people who live inland and never swim. But those people might have developed, make more use of certain other muscles. That kind
Yeah,
of
makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense. And what? Okay, and like I said, just going down the list, and when we come back after the break, we'll talk about your direct plan. But what about? I want to talk about dirt. I want to talk about atmosphere. I want to talk about radiation, what the sun is doing, and so what about it's reactivating the core? Is that possible? So let's start with the atmosphere. Can we survive with the atmosphere that is there, or is there a way to thicken it and restore it?
Oh, we'll want to thicken it and restore it. No, I mean, we can survive inside of enclosed habitats that have fully pressurized atmospheres. But if you're talking about going outside, right now on Mars, you need to wear a spacesuit. But I do think there are ways that human beings could alter Mars to thicken its atmosphere so that in the first place, you won't need a spacesuit. You'll just need an oxygen mask. And then eventually you won't need the oxygen mask.
And how would you do that?
Okay, well, the first order of business is to thicken the atmosphere. Okay?
Right.
Now, Mars has got a lot of carbon dioxide that has been soaked into the soil. Adsorbed is the scientific word, but basically soaked in. And if you heat the planet, it will outgas and thicken the atmosphere. And as it thickens the atmosphere, it'll also raise the temperature because CO2 is a greenhouse gas. How do you get it to outgas? Use artificial greenhouse gases. There are greenhouse gases that we know how to make, artificial ones, that are much more effective at creating a greenhouse effect than CO2 is. Really, hundreds of times more effective. And so now we don't want to do that on Earth. We don't want to create global warming. We're creating global warming by accident right now as a byproduct of other activities. But if we actually wanted to create global warming, we could do a much better job. The global warming that has occurred on Earth is about 1.5 degrees in the past 150 years. On Mars, we could go up 10 degrees in 50 years if we put our minds to it, producing these fluorocarbon gases, which is what they are.
Do we have the resources on Mars to create those gases?
Well, yeah, the materials are there. You need to bring the energy. That would be to start with nuclear power and then eventually fusion power.
And how would it How would it diffuse? How do you
Oh, well,
distribute it?
if you just make the stuff and throw it into the atmosphere, it'll spread all over the place.
Explain. I mean, it's a planet, so you have to do it on a planet scale.
Yeah, you have to produce a lot, but if you set up a factory producing fluorocarbon gases on Mars and just shoot the product up the smokestack, it'll mix with the atmosphere and the winds will blow it all over the place. And it will, I mean, you have to produce a lot to affect the planet. But to give you an idea, if we were producing them on Mars at the same rate we actually do produce them in related types of gases, chlorofluorocarbons on Earth, which are produced globally for refrigerants. That's what they're for. They make them, they put them in air conditioners, refrigerators, things like this. If you weren't putting them in refrigerators and just shooting them into the atmosphere, just in order to get them into the atmosphere, and you did it with an industry the size of the Earth's current refrigerant industry, you'd warm Mars up by 10 degrees in 50 years. Yeah. And that would be enough to drive a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere, out of the soil into the atmosphere by warming the soil with CO2. And that would then warm the planet even more. And then once you start getting the planet sufficiently warm, that'll start causing water that's frozen to melt. So you start getting liquid water on the surface of Mars, and also some water vapor in the atmosphere. And water vapor also is a greenhouse gas, incidentally. So between the water vapor, the carbon dioxide, and the artificial greenhouse gases, you could warm the planet up nicely, as much as like 50 centigrades. And now you got rivers flowing on Mars and lakes filling up with water and all that kind of thing. And now you can start spreading plants. Now, that planet that I just described, the remade Mars, you would still need an oxygen mask because the atmosphere would be mostly CO2. But you wouldn't need a spacesuit. You could just wear, a coat. So that's a big plus. And plants could grow in the open, and you wouldn't need to use greenhouses anymore. And so now all of a sudden you have a lot more farmland. And now you're spreading plants all over the place, and they're starting to put oxygen in the atmosphere. And eventually it will become breathable.
Is the soil workable?
Well, initially you got to work at it. There's these peroxides in the soil,
right.
But you can destroy them by wetting them with water. They will break down. And there's other soil that has these things called perchlorates in them, and it's kind of like detergent. You'd have to wash that out. But if we start getting the water going on Mars, the water cycle, you'll have rain, you see. And that'll destroy the peroxides and start washing the perchlorates out. So the soil, it's a process, okay? And then probably the first thing you would do to improve the soil is there's certain kinds of microorganisms that you could release that would improve the soil to prepare it for larger plants.
Now, we know that Mars had oceans, vast oceans, and before the atmosphere was blown away and everything, happened pretty quickly, and the planet itself and its core became dead and bombed with radiation. Was there ever, and I'm waiting for this evidence, but I just want your opinion on this. Was there ever a time on Mars when there was plant life, when there was oxygen, and there was, I'm not talking about little green men running around, but do you think that there was biology on Mars at some point?
There clearly was a time on Mars when it was habitable, where certainly many kinds of microorganisms could live there. In fact, here's the thing. The early Mars in this period, which had liquid water and a CO2 dominated atmosphere, was very similar to the early Earth at that very same time. The Earth's oxygen wasn't there from the start. It's been put there by plants. So early Mars and early Earth were pretty much twins. And so there's very good and life evolved on Earth during that period. Okay, it didn't evolve with oxygen. Oxygen came from life. Okay, and the so if life could have appeared on Earth, it could have appeared on Mars. And in fact, life on Earth may even have come from Mars or vice versa, because there is natural transport of materials between Earth and Mars. That materials like Martian rocks land on Earth all the time. They're knocked off of Mars by meteorite impacts and they go flying through space and some land here. We get about 500 kilograms, 1,000 pounds of Martian rocks are landing on Earth every year. And there was probably a lot more flying back and forth in the early solar system because there was a lot more meteors hitting things. It was a more active pinball game. And there's a good basis for believing that life on Earth came from Mars, because Mars cooled first. The planets initially were molten, okay, and then they cooled down. And they cooled down till they became cool enough for liquid water. And it's at that point then life has a shot, right? And Mars cooled first. So the conditions for the formation of life happened on Mars before it happened on Earth. Now, they continued to happen on Mars even after it happened on Earth. But Mars was the first out of the box. And so there's reasons to suspect that Earth life came from Mars, both for that reason and also there's another reason, which is that there's a mystery about life on Earth, which is that we don't find any free living organisms simpler than bacteria. And the reason why that's a mystery is because bacteria are pretty complicated. I'm thinking that bacteria are the first life is like thinking the iPhone is the first machine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now iPhone's not the first machine. There's all kinds of more primitive machines that are embedded in the iPhone. There is telephone, there is computer, there is batteries, there is steel, there is glass. There's all these technologies that go back actually thousands of years that get combined to make an iPhone. So boom, we find the first life on Earth to be an iPhone.
Upright. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Where's the telephone? Okay. Where's the battery? Where's the steel? Okay. Now we don't find that here. We don't find. See, look. If you were an extraterrestrial archaeologist, and let's say humans went extinct, and they were trying to figure out about humans, and they were looking at, where these people in North America come from. Well, first of all, they would know that the Western civilization came to North America from Europe, because the most primitive structures of, Western European type structures in America date from the Renaissance. You don't find ancient Greek and Roman stuff here. You don't find Bronze Age stuff. You don't find, in other words, we start out in the Renaissance as the first colonists landing in America. So we know they are an immigrant phenomenon. And furthermore, if you look deeper, you'd find out that people in the Western Hemisphere are an immigrant phenomena, because people evolved from great apes, which did not exist in the Western Hemisphere. They exist in Africa. And that's how we know that people, in fact, came from Africa, because the things that we evolved from were only in Africa. So it looks like life on Earth is an immigrant phenomenon. And the closest place it could have come from is Mars. Now, it's conceivable it could have come to both places from outside the solar system. That's possible, too. That's a theory called panspermia. But there's some questions about it, because a lot of people think it's hard for life to travel across interstellar distances. It's clearly possible for life, though, to travel across interplanetary distances.
The ideas for that, when we really look at it, it would suggest to me that it's easier to go to Mars than it is to the moon. The process that they're like, we can't get anything to land on the moon, it seems like, right? It's like a problem. And it was announced today that we've got a heat shield problem now with Boeing. And the Office of the Inspector General for NASA gave him an F in the report today on that. And the staging, I mean, the proposed ideas are to have a jump off point on the moon and then get everything done there and then head over to Mars. And it seems like it's a little bit backwards. Would it be better to just go straight to Mars? And is Elon's Starliner and his rocket good enough to get the job done right now? And Boeing is getting failing grades.
All right. So you talked about a lot of things there. Let's try to unpeel it. Okay. It's easier to go to the moon. It's much harder to settle the moon. Okay. Because the moon's closer to Earth. Okay.
Right.
Just Greenland was closer to Europe in the age of ocean exploration. Europeans got there first. But it wasn't a place you could settle because it just doesn't have a rich enough environment. So Mars compares to the moon as North America compares to Greenland as a target for colonization. If you just want to sail someplace, Greenland's closer to Europe. But if you want to settle someplace, North America is a much better place to go. And that is one of the principal reasons why I think we ought to make Mars our goal. And that's also why Elon thinks that Mars should be our goal. Because if the goal is settlement, not just going someplace to say you went someplace, then Mars is the right goal. So, yeah, we should go straight to Mars. That's what I think.
Is Elon's tech good enough to do that?
It will be. I mean, Musk's methodology is build it, fly it, crash it, figure out what went wrong, fly it again, get further through the flight envelope, crash further down through the flight profile, figure out that problem, then try again. Everything they've done. Okay, SpaceX. The first 3 Falcon 1 launches failed. They succeeded on the 4th. Okay, the first Falcon 9 launch succeeded, but the first 5 attempts to land it failed. They succeeded on the 6th. Okay, the Starship, 5 failures in landing it, although each one got better and closer to pulling it off until finally they succeeded. Now they're trying to launch to orbit the 2-stage Starship and Heavy first stage combination. And the first one failed, the second one failed, but it got further. Third one actually kind of got to orbit, but failed. And now they're going to try a 4th, probably within a month. I would bet $10 that it'll fail, but it'll get further than the 3rd one did. And my guess, just guesstimating it, is I think they'll succeed on try number 5. Of course, they may take to number 6. But that thing's going to be operational by the end of the year. And then there's some more things they have to figure out how to do in order to get it not just to orbit, but to Mars. So I think that'll take them a few more years. But, a few more years, not so long. 2026, 2027, they'll be able to shoot one off to Mars, and it'll probably crash on Mars. And then in 2028, they'll shoot one to Mars, and it'll almost successfully land on Mars. And then the next year, they'll shoot one, and it will land on Mars. And then they'll be preparing to send people. It's that kind of thing.
Sure.
Where they're committed. The technology intrinsically will work. It's just a question of getting it right. There's a million details in these things. And generally, I visited Musk a few years after he had started SpaceX. He's in his first factory, not the current one, the smaller one. And they were getting ready to launch the Falcon 1. And I said, you got to build at least 3 because the first 2 are going to fail. And he says, why? tell me what's wrong with my design. I said, I don't know what's wrong with your design, but I know there's an awful lot of things that got to go right in these launches. And you generally, the first couple of times somebody makes a mistake, it's going to fail. Just know that that's probably what's going to happen. And it did. And in fact, the third one failed too. They succeeded on the fourth try. But that's how it is. There's a million parts in these rockets, and if one wire is connected the wrong way, the thing fails. So.
Yeah, I last summer, Robert, I went to Vandenberg as a guest to watch a SpaceX launch on the base, on the beach, right there. And this is what went through my mind in a very twisted way. Watching the loudness, what it looked like, and how majestic it was all of that. It was crazy to see. But as it's all that kept going through my mind was that's not NASA. It's a private company, and everything has got to go right. Right, and it was just incredible. It was a mind-blowing experience, and I'm so glad that I was fortunate enough. We were just a handful of guests that were there on the beach with security, but we weren't just roaming around Vandenberg unattended. But that's what went through my mind. That's not NASA. That is a private company getting this done. It was very impressive.
Yeah, sure. But, NASA can do some of these things too, and has. But once again, this is hard stuff. But the thing that Musk has done that's different is he doesn't try to analyze and check the numbers forever and ever before he tries. He does a certain amount of analysis, checks the numbers, and he launches. And, yep, it fails, but then he finds out that way that's where the problem is. And he fixes that one, and he launches again, and it gets further into the flight till the next thing goes wrong. But operating this way, he's been able to get development done faster than NASA has done in recent decades. It's a lot more like what NASA was like in the 60s, really.
Let's take our break. Robert, let's take our break right here. We'll pick this up when we come back. And also, one of the most important parts of any of this, and especially with me, is the food. We'll be talking about that, as well as the Mars Direct plan when we come back. Our guest tonight, Dr. Robert Zubrin. I'm Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's fade to black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. And right now, if you get a Game Changer membership for a limited time, you will get Fade to Black Blend coffee with your Game Changer membership. That's right. We have 2 t-shirts. We have the original, the classic Fade to Black t-shirt. You know you want one. Post a picture. Send it to us. We'll put it in our Fade to Black gallery. And we've got the new official Fade to Black t-shirt drawn by Michael Oming. 2 t-shirts, 2 ways to get them. Get yours today. Everything is in stock. Everything gets autographed. Everything includes shipping. And you're going to get a tracking number. And with a Game Changer membership, you get an email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads of the show. Those are uploaded every single night after the show to the website. So don't delay. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Dr. Robert Zubrin, is back with us. An amazing conversation so far, and it is. Mars is the focus. It's the focus for just about every agency. So many companies are involved with what is going on. And we have NASA, we have private companies, and we have private endeavors, and we have different ideas. Robert Zubrin has been talking about this for decades, and the moment is now here. And for me, look, the thing is about Fade to Black, and I want to be very clear. I talk about the stuff that interests me. And one of them is going to Mars and our space program. It's a huge interest to me, science and physics, of course, conspiracy theories and all of that. But let me tell you about 2 other things. Very important to me. Food and music. And if I'm going to Mars, and I've thought about it, right? Would I go? Those are my two factors. I don't mind the spacesuit. I don't mind living underground or living in a habitat and putting up with all of that. But it would really be a long, horrible trip without some kind of entertainment and something good to eat. So let's start there. Robert, what
Hey,
about food?
all right.
What's that's a big deal, isn't it?
It is indeed. So listen, by the way, I did want to mention, I mentioned earlier, I have a new book called The New World on Mars. What Can We Create on the Red Planet? Okay. Now, basic thesis is relatively soon people are going to be able to go to Mars. The question is, what are we going to create when we get there? And what kind of societies are going to emerge on Mars? And once again, I think there's going to be many different Mars settlements started by people with very different ideas as to what the ideal society should be. And the ones that get it right will outgrow the rest, and they will become the prevailing form of human society on Mars. So that's one reason why the successful Mars colonies will be free societies, not anti-utopias like in Total Recall, because who would want to emigrate to a tyranny? Okay, so they won't. Okay, and so any such societies will be stillborn and fade away. Okay, but yes, beyond that, beyond a question of human freedom and prosperity, there are aesthetic considerations. So I think that Martian cities, the successful ones, the ones that actually emerge as the dominant form, will be beautiful. And I think they will also have extremely dynamic cultural lives. Okay, because once again, these are the things that will draw people there. So
it's so important. It's got to be, it's not a joke. You need to keep the stimulation there. You can't. You'll have anarchy before things get off the ground.
Right. No. So you want to have a very dynamic cultural life, and you'll want to have it also be a form of cultural life that brings that society together, that creates some form of community. Because I believe, given the nature of the hostile environment on Mars, that will be a requirement for a successful colony. Now, music, essentially all human societies have music. And you have to ask yourself why. And I believe it's because those that don't die. Because music has a way to bring people together. When people sing together or dance together, so forth, they bond. And it's one way to create a form of solidarity, and you share the same songs. Okay. My generation that grew up in the 60s was brought together by, well, rock and roll. Just like the generation of, the 40s were brought together by, swing, and so forth. And the generation before them by rag. And I do think, I can't tell you what they'll be, but I do think there'll be distinctive, new, and exciting forms of musical culture in Martian cities. And I think also, though, there's one thing where we've retrogressed a bit here on Earth in this respect, which is that music used to be more participatory than it is now. My parents' generation, young people would get together in the parks in the evenings and sing. Of course, that doesn't happen now. It's not a part of our culture, but it once was. And I think so. But I definitely think that Mars will have very lively community culture, and which will include music, which will include community dances. It will include public lectures. I think rather than having people go to universities, I think the whole Martian city will be a university. And that the intellectual life will be much more broadly shared than isolated in these separate little universities. And there's a lot of reasons why I think that would be a good thing. But the
food, yeah. Let's get back to food.
Food once again. Now here's another thing. Okay,
yes.
All right. I don't buy this stuff that Martians are going to eat cockroaches or something. Okay. You hear about these crazy projects, right, of this kind. Because once again, who would want to go to a place where that's what you ate? I mean, sure, a human expedition where you've got professional explorers, basically space marines, if you wish, they'll eat anything, okay? But if you're talking about colonists who are going to bring their families to live in a new city, okay, no, they're going to want to have good food. And furthermore, actually, if you want to, I think that the successful Mars colony, it won't be exactly multicultural, it'll be more of a melting pot, because you do have to have community solidarity. And so you do need to have a common culture, but you're going to want to draw from as many cultures as you can from the Earth. Okay. So, one of the great things about America has been that, you can get Chinese food and Italian food and Thai food and, and American food and Mexican food. And it's all there, right? Because we are drawing people from all over the world, and they've brought their cuisines here with them. I think, you're going to need to grow both wheat and rice on Mars, because you're going to want to have both Caucasians and Asians wanting to come to your city. If you don't, your city will remain small. It will be outgrown. In other words, the ones that ultimately become the prevailing ones. In other words, whether they recognize it or not, the Martian cities are in a competition for immigrants. So you're going to want to have an attractive culture with attractive cultural life and good cuisine. Yeah.
How is it? Would we? I hate this thought because it messes with my head. But would we ultimately manufacture? Would it be lab-grown meats and proteins, or are we taking chickens and fish to Mars?
Well, this is hard to predict, but if you want my opinion, I think it'll be both. I think you can create lab-grown protein and feed it to fish and chickens and grow a lot more fish and chickens that way. But then the people would be eating fish and chicken. They wouldn't be eating lab protein. So in other words, there's ways that you can leverage, in other words, it can be very efficient actually to produce protein through chemical engineering techniques. But that's not the food you'd want to feed people. You except under an emergency basis. But it is potentially a way to make the food chain much more efficient and create a lot more of high value food.
The idea of society and in humans in general, everything, it's like entropy takes over. Starts off simple and a good idea and just grows and then ends badly. And we have a bad habit of repeating that over and over again. Do you think we can leave that behind once we get to Mars, or will a war break out between two competing cities? Almost. Have you seen For All Mankind? Have you seen that?
Yes.
Pretty interesting take on that, and other TV series too. The one that Ron Howard did was pretty amazing. I'm trying to think of the name of that one too as well.
It's called Mars, and I was in the first season of that. but they both have elements that I think are fundamentally true in them, but I don't fully agree with either of them. Look, as far as entropy is concerned, use a cliche, it's the circle of life. Things grow. No.
Right.
Things grow and then they decay. But
Yes.
they can nevertheless be successful if before they decay, they give birth to new young things that can go further. All right. So the idea is, see, this is why I don't like the word sustainable. I don't think anything is sustainable. If you try to stay still with anything, sooner or later it will decay. But things can grow to a point where they can give birth to new things, and a lot more new things with a lot more potential. So the fact that something that you had has decayed away, it doesn't kill you, because in fact this whole process is unleashing greater and greater potentials as you go. I mean, we see this in technology all the time, that technologies that were really great at one time have faded away, but they gave birth to better technologies. And so and forms of society and cultural forms. So that's what I think about that. I think that the way to overcome entropy is to have children. Okay, understood broadly. Okay, ultimately you can't preserve the old forever, but if you've got something good, it can give birth to something new before it fades away. And it can give birth to many things that are new before it fades away.
I always considered children to be the best examples of entropy. Let me explain. You move into a new house, right? Your wife, you, and your daughter. And your daughter is 4 years old. Brand new house. You move in. The daughter is in her new room that is spotlessly clean. Look at that same room in a year. That is entropy playing out. Yeah.
But, except in the course of messing up her room, she's developing her creative powers.
Yeah. You're right about that. And you do end up cleaning up your room at some point, right? When you've had enough. Now, have you told, or have you been consulted on the best place to land? And I hope I'm asking the question right, because you've been thinking about this for a long time. Geographically, you've had your eye on Mars, and I'm sure that you've got a push pin poked in somewhere on a map on Mars. This is where it should happen. Have you been consulted on that, or have you expressed your opinion about that?
Okay, well, I haven't been consulted on it.
Do you have a push pin on a map?
Yeah, sure, a little bit north of the Valles Marineris, but the thing is, it's a more general discussion, okay? Because it's not like I'm fixated on one particular place. This is my place. It's okay. You want some place. You don't want to be in the poles. You want to be in the tropical regions of Mars, because Mars is cold enough, and so yeah, okay. It doesn't have to be right at the equator, but definitely south of like 30 degrees or something. Or 40 anyway. Maybe 40, because then you could be right up at the southern end of the glacier, so you'd have water and reasonable amount of sunlight and so forth. You want to be at low altitude where the air is thicker, because the air is thin, and so we want to get it on we don't want to be on the thinner parts of the thin air planet. We want to be on the thicker parts. So low altitude, low latitude, and scientifically interesting. I want to be in a place where, because the first missions are going to explore, and it's a very important thing to explore to determine the past history of life on Mars in particular. So I want to go to a place that maybe water was running at one point and may have deposited fossils and this kind of thing, or where life may have most likely been and left fossils. And then I want to go to a place that is close to promising mineral ore. So I want to have a place, so this is a little tricky, where you have water action, but close to a place where, for instance, there may have been volcanic action, and which have created interesting mineral ores. So those are all the criteria that you're looking for, and you want to get as many of them as you can and not be a complete loser on any of them.
Yeah, it's a tough call. It's a tough call. The I can't remember. I watched too much information on this, but it may have been Ron Howard's series where they were drilling and searching for water, and they eventually, it was like, right, like an oil well gusher, right, and that happens. Is that getting too science fiction, or is that semi in reality, and could that actually happen?
It could happen. Mars still has a hot core. We know this because there are volcanoes on Mars that are a few 100 million years old, which may sound very old, but it's less than 5% of the age of the planet. So, in other words, if there could be a volcano on Mars 500 million years ago, it could be a volcano on Mars tomorrow. And so it's got a hot core, it's got a cold surface. In between is in between, and it's possible you could drill down to a geothermally heated location, which is in contact with water, and it could make steam and it could blow. We know, in fact, there are hydrothermal systems on Mars because we have detected methane on Mars, which either has to be produced by hydrothermal systems or by biological organisms living in methanogenic bacteria living in hydrothermal systems. So there's hydrothermal systems on Mars. So yeah, conceivably you could drill and get a spindle top of steam.
Now, in your Mars Direct plan, let's discuss this for a second. But there is a great debate, and I've talked to you about this before. We're kind of repeating this. It's been a while. Do we go into a cave? Do we live underground first, or do we start building on the surface? Do we live on the surface out of the gate?
Well, okay, the first landers will be on the surface. They'll just land their spacecraft on the surface, and they'll use them as their houses on Mars. But if we're talking about the first colonies, there's an argument to be made for either making use of natural caverns, lava tubes, or excavating them out like the New York subway system, or a better subway system. You could have whole underground cities like subway systems, and then have domes over them. And so you're spending the bulk of your time indoors. I mean, most people spend less than 10% of their time outside. I mean, I spend most of my time inside. Unless you're a farmer or a construction worker, most people spend 90% of their time and maybe 2 hours a day outside at most, right? And so if you have most of the city underground, and most of the even individual houses underground, but just domes over them, and that's where you have your gardens and your greenhouses and so forth, and you go up there to work an hour, 2, 3 a day, perhaps, basically you've reduced your radiation dose to 10%. of what it would be if you spent all your time on the surface. And since the radiation dose on the surface is just the same as at the space station, which is to say it's moderate, people do it. In other words, it'd be better not to have your whole population getting that radiation dose, but if you can reduce it to 1/10 of that, well, then there's not really a problem.
Well, Scottsdale in the summer, you're spending 100% of your time indoors, right?
That's right.
Alaska in the winter, you're spending 100% of your time indoors. It's not. I don't know why people are making that a concern when you just have to look at the way that we live here.
Right.
Now
Well,
there's no
look,
question.
and you don't even have to name it. I mean, look, here, Colorado in the spring is very nice, but I today spent most of my time working in my office.
Right.
And the same as the large majority of people here. Very few got to spend the day sitting out on their decks in the sunshine.
Now with the trip to Mars can only happen, no matter how we do it, whether we're sending a probe there or humans there. It's every 2 years. It's when the proximity is correct with Earth and Mars with their respective orbits.
Correct.
Is there any way to speed that up, or is it just a technical hurdle that we can't overcome at this point? I'm talking about speed.
Okay. All right. If you had much more advanced propulsion systems than we have, this constraint would not be there. Okay. But if we're talking about the kind of propulsion systems that we actually have now, and are likely to have for the next 30 years, you get a launch window to Mars every 2 years, as you said, and the launch window itself is maybe 3 months long. So it's not like just one day. It's
Right.
amount of time. So you got 3 months every 2 years in which you can launch to Mars, and similarly on the way back.
On the way back, it's the same thing. So, which you're inside of my head, Robert. I love that. So the trip to Mars, unless it's going to be a week, right, of you being there, so you can turn around and split. It's a 2-year mission.
It is, the round trip is 2.5 years. That is,
6 months. 6 months to get there.
Yes, a year and a half there, and then 6 months to come home.
Right. And there's just no way around that.
No, unless you decide to immigrate, in which case it's just 6 months there.
Right. But would you? I know it's a fundamental question, and I get asked this all the time. Would I go to Mars? Would you go?
Yes.
You get it. You would go tomorrow?
If I could, sure.
I mean, there's always somebody's got to be first, right? It doesn't matter if you're Columbus or Magellan, whatever it is. Somebody's got to go over the mountain to the village on the other side for the first time, and to go and check it out. And they probably are not going to come back. So you need to say your goodbyes. And why is this such a big deal now? With the consideration of Mars, in that explorers are explorers, and there are people that are willing to go and do that. And it seems like we've lost sight of our own history.
Well, you sure have. I mean, because look, you and I are both descended from people who took a one-way trip.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the very large majority, 99% of Americans are descended from people who took a one-way trip, and not that long ago. And most of us are pretty glad that they took that trip. There aren't that many people here who say, gee, I wish Grandpa had stayed in Poland. And So yeah, colonization is a one-way trip. Life's a one-way trip. Okay. And so, but here's the thing: you only live once, and I'd like to accomplish something in my life that would be of permanent and enduring value. And I think that the colonization of Mars is the grandest enterprise that humanity has ever undertaken. And if I could play a significant role in it, I'd like to do that. And well, okay, I am playing some role in it right now by my writing and my technology work, but to actually go and be one of the colonists, that'd be even better.
The other part of this is we were told, you and I, we're about the same age. He got a couple of years on me, but we're about the same age. We were made certain promises when you and I were growing up. There were guarantees that were laid out. And we sort of saw that happen with Apollo, but they pumped the brakes on that. And everything else, space elevators, Holiday Inn orbiting planet Earth, moon base, Mars base, flying cars, right? We got none of that stuff. We kind of got a cheated. And I thought that we would have moved on from Mars 20 years ago, that we would have our sights on another planet or going interstellar. What do you think? Are we going to do this in our lifetime? And if we do pull it off, I know you said, 2030s is a pretty realistic thing. I may not be around for that. And that kind of bums me out. And let's say we do it in our lifetime. What's next? Is there something beyond Mars once we figure out how to get it done?
Well, sure, there are things beyond Mars. Asteroids, outer solar system, the stars. I think that the enterprise of opening up Mars is what's going to give us the way to the stars, because this, as I mentioned, these Martian city-states are going to be extremely technologically creative. And some of the stuff they're going to be messing around with are things like fusion power, which leads to fusion-powered rockets, which then start giving you an interstellar capability. So the culture that we create on Mars, the culture of invention and the culture of daring as well, of reaffirming our tradition as a culture of pioneers. This is the rocket fuel that gets you to the stars.
Have you seen The Expanse?
I've seen a lot of it. I kind of lost the thread in the last few seasons, but I saw a considerable amount of it.
Okay. Pretty fascinating take on humanity and the colonization of our solar system. And by the way, the last 2 seasons were the best.
So maybe I should go have another look. But
yeah,
it's one of the things. I've gotten to the point where I prefer watching movies to series, because with a movie they got 2 hours to get to the point and make something happen. With a series, they can drag it out forever. So I'm liking movies right now. The series has got to be pretty damn good to get me to want to commit.
Well, what was interesting about The Expanse, because you just touched upon this right there, which The Expanse had Earthlings, Martians, and the Belters.
Yeah.
Right. Three different cultures, 3 distinct governments, 3 distinct ways of life, and it was a very interesting take, and one that really hadn't been touched upon in science fiction or fiction in general. And to watch it like that and have it play out, and of course there's an ET component. I don't want to give away the last season that plays out, that was introduced in the first season. But anyway, it was pretty interesting how Martians. It's so funny to say that, but anyway, how Martians developed their own way of life, and how the Belters develop their own way of life, and that's got to be our future, right? There isn't any other choice here.
Well,
We are going to
what I would
expand.
add to that is there'll be dozens of Martian ways of life and hundreds of Belter ways of life. So yeah, I think the fundamental, and obviously to try to do that with a TV series would be pretty over the top. But yes, they showed 3 different cultures, and I think it'd be more like 300 different cultures.
What and with your Mars Direct plan, if you were the director of this, the director of the direct plan, but you were pulling the strings, what's your order? What's your method of operation?
What do you say? What's the Mars Direct plan?
Yes.
Well, the Mars Direct plan is based on using 2 launches of a heavy lift rocket to send people to Mars. The first sends an Earth return vehicle with no one in it, and it goes to Mars with the equipment to manufacture rocket fuel, methane oxygen rocket fuel, out of Martian CO2 and water. So now you got a fully fueled Earth return vehicle waiting for you on the Martian surface. That being the case, at the next launch opportunity, you launch the people out in a Habitat spacecraft, and it goes and it lands near the Earth return vehicle, and they use it as their house and laboratory and workshop on Mars. And at the end of the mission, they get in the Earth return vehicle and they fly it home. They leave the habitat behind on Mars. So each time you do this, you add another habitat to the base. And before you know it, you got the beginning of the first human settlement on a new world. That's the basic Mars Direct plan. Musk's variant on that is he goes to Mars and he comes back in the same kind of ship. There isn't an Earth return vehicle and a habitat craft. The habitat craft is also a return vehicle. Now, conceivably, you could go to Mars, refuel that ship, and come back. Or if you wanted to have the same degree of safety that we have in Mars Direct of always having your return ride waiting for you, you could send the first one out with no one in it, have it fuel itself up, then send the second one out with the people, land near it, take the first one home, and leave the other one behind on Mars. But if you did it that way, you'd only need 1 launch per opportunity, but you wouldn't be building up a base as you go. You would, because you're rotating the ships. Of course, you could always launch 2 each opportunity and come back in 1, and that would lead to a buildup as well. So it's a variant on the same theme, but that's the Mars Direct approach. No on-orbit assembly, no use of advanced propulsion, no orbital rendezvous of any kind, just direct launch to Mars, use in situ propellant to do direct return.
The what about the amount? What's the passenger count? Are you leaning on the Elon Musk 747 jumbo jet, right? Crazy amount of people per launch.
Well, that's just it. This is another disagreement I have with Elon. I think he needs to also create a mini Starship, about 1/5 the size of the current Starship. It itself would make an excellent upper stage for, say, a Falcon 9. So you'd have a fully reusable medium lift capability there, complementing a fully reusable heavy lift capability with the Starship. But also you could lift one of those up to Earth orbit fully fueled, and it could just shoot right off to Mars. If you wanted to come back, that's the ship to come back in. There's no reason to, there aren't hundreds of people on Mars looking to come back to Earth. So for an exploration craft, the mini Starship is superior. Now, if you're talking about colonization, where you want to bring a large number of people to Mars, then yeah, having a larger ship is a very good thing to have. So I think that the Starship is actually well optimized for colonization, but I'd like to have a smaller one for exploration.
You mentioned not having a rendezvous point. Why is that? Because it seems like launching one big rocket, with one big, craft on the front of it, full of people, is heavier and more risky than launching a bunch of smaller rockets to an orbiting platform that's got everybody on it, and then you take the heavy load to Mars from there and stage everybody. Doesn't that make more sense?
Well, that's what Werner von Braun thought, but that's not what I think. I'd like to keep it simple.
And just direct every time. But isn't that the problem with Elon? Is that the rocket has got how many engines on it right now?
Oh, well, okay. Yes, he's got like 31 or so engines on the stage,
right?
And that's a lot. And except for the first launch where there was a problem with that, the second and third, that system worked well. So yes, he had a real problem with that on the first launch, but he solved that, and we're past that now. So academically, you could say, gee, having 31 rocket engines on the lower stage is just nuts. It's not going to work. It'll fail. And it did on the first launch, but not on the second and the third. And I don't think we're going to see it failing again. So, that's one of these things where it's easier to show that it works than convince people that it will work.
How do we, so is oxygen, I want to dispel or confirm or deny, I should say, a couple of conspiracy theories that are out there when it comes to oxygen. And one of them is, and I've read this so much now that I'm wondering if there's a grain of truth to it, but you're the one to ask, that at 6 inches off the surface of Mars, you can breathe. Is there truth to that?
No.
There's no. Where's the origin of this? I know you've heard it. Where does this come from? Is that just somebody's imagination? There isn't a kernel of truth to that somewhere. Is there more oxygen at ankle level than at 6 feet? Or
it's just no. It's not physical. It's not true.
Okay.
Somebody made that up and somehow got it into the internet somewhere. And
I know. It's everywhere. Now, but is oxygen going? Obviously, we can't tank it there. Is all of it
on Mars
from the water?
From the water or from the carbon dioxide? Either way. I mean, that's what plants do. They make oxygen and food from water and carbon dioxide.
And the carbon dioxide, is it at ground level, or is it in the atmosphere?
Well, it's in the atmosphere all the way to the ground. Yeah.
It is. Okay. All right. And so that's is there a way to manufacture oxygen in that way enough to supplement a community and a large habitat?
Certainly.
It seems, really.
Oh yeah. No, in fact, I myself have built machines that turn water and CO2 into methane and oxygen, and the amount of oxygen we were making would have been enough for several people, and it was a small machine. So no, this is an entirely doable thing. This is 19th century chemical engineering.
Well, I understand, separating the water ice and creating oxygen, but
that's another way to do it. Yes,
it's okay.
That's how they do it on submarines. They electrolyze water to make oxygen.
Sure.
And they've got these big submarines have crews of like 100 people.
Makes sense. So that's the one fundamental, the two fundamental things to overcome, obviously, besides having a roof over your head, are oxygen and water. If we have both of those, which Mars has, this should be an extremely doable thing with today's technology.
Yes, or elaborations of today's technology. In other words, it's hardware that needs to be developed, okay? But we're not talking about Los Alamos 1943 here, where you're venturing into new realms of science. This is engineering.
Were you, I live in Palmdale. Skunk Works is right up the street. Did you work at Skunk Works?
No, I worked at Lockheed Martin in Denver.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what do you think is the next step for not only NASA but for Elon? I understand, getting Starship 1 functional. I mean, that is first.
He needs to first of all get Starship to orbit and get it there reliably, and then rapidly. I mean, one of the most impressive things about the Falcons is not just that they work, but that he's able to launch 2 a week, which is fucking.
It's insane. Incredible. It's insane.
Yeah. And so it's not just reusable; it's rapidly reusable. So Starship's going to need a little work before it gets up to that degree of perfection, and it'll take a couple of years to do that. But also, then they have to do the next trick, which is to create tanker starships that will refuel the Starship after it reaches orbit, so it could fly from orbit to Mars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing of doing orbital refueling, and that'll take a year or 2 to get down. And then once then they'll be able to shoot things off to Mars. Now, what I would do is the first several starships go to Mars. Don't try to land people. Try to land large robotic expeditions. In other words, right now we land one robot at a time on Mars, Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, Perseverance.
Right.
Okay, right. Imagine you had a ship like Starship that can bring 100 tons to Mars, not just one. So you land and you let loose 100 robots, kind of like, Normandy Beach. The planks come down on the LSTs and the troops come out. And okay, so now the planks come down on the Starship and the robots come out. And maybe some of them are ground robots and some of them are helicopters and what have you. And they go out there, they could do a fantastic job of exploration, and some of them could be used to start building a base. Setting up the system to make the propellant on Mars, this kind of thing. So you launch a number of these, and probably the first couple of landings will fail, but you're mass producing these robots. On the third or fourth try, your landing succeeds, and now you've got a gigantic robotic expedition on Mars, and you've proven the landing system of Starship, and maybe
that's the big thing right there. And we're going to wrap the show on this. We've got to figure out how to land on another planet with an atmosphere that's not our.
But he's going to be landing the starships on Earth, and actually, it should work fine. That's one of the things I'm worried about least. The Starships are already Falcons are doing automated landings twice a week right now. So listen, there's one more thing I'd like to bring up since we are coming towards the end. Mars Society is having its next conference in Seattle at the University of Washington, August 8th through 11th. It's going to be a really great conference. We already have 20 top speakers registered. They're going to be part of it, and I anticipate there'll probably be well over 100 papers presented. And Seattle in August, you can't beat it. The Pacific Northwest, wow. So I hope people put it on their calendar. If you want to find out about it, it's at marssociety.org is our website. And we have an open call for papers right now. That is, if you have any idea of anything that bears on either robotic or human Mars exploration, human settlement, terraforming Mars, social structures for Mars, ideas on how to do privately financed Mars missions, the economics of Mars colonies, and the culture for Mars colonies, Mars music. We once had a paper, Mars Needs Guitars, and it was a good one too. And I see you have several. Anyway, if you got any ideas on anything, from the technical to the social to the economic to the political to the artistic that bears on Mars, You can submit an abstract. Maximum 300 words, minimum, say 100, to tells what you want to talk about. And then there's a good chance, if the paper's interesting, that you will be notified that you've been accepted and you can come and give a talk at our conference.
I'm going to submit. I'm going to submit something.
All right, cool.
That's where you're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to laugh. Hey, Robert, marssociety.org. We've got the links below over on our website. And also,
right
and the book is right there. And now Robert's got many books, and I have most of them. But the links are below. Get the book. Robert, just thank you so much, man. And you've been at this for a very long time, and you should be really feeling pretty good right about now. Things are about to start to click. And just thank you so much for your contributions, not only to the community, but to the world. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on your show one more time. Okay, and hope to see you in Seattle. Okay.
I'll talk to you, Robert. Thank you so much, my brother.
Okay.
Robert Zubrin, everybody. It is marssociety.org. The links are below, again, on our website and throughout social media. And with that, this wraps another week here on Fade to Black. As everybody knows, today is my Friday. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm doing this weekend, but I'm going to go get it all done, and then I'll see everybody right back here on Monday. Thank you, Dr. Zubrin. Fantastic conversation. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Genocide. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Dex. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kevin. Webmasters, Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. And this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until Monday, I want you to have a great, safe, fun, amazing weekend. Go Backley Tappy.